Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking on a huge task. We have this stack of sources that present a completely different way of looking at power, at reality, even history itself.
It's a total stress test for what we think we know.
Exactly. And our mission here is to really dig into why the things you just take for granted, things like
Yeah.
money, your happiness, maybe even who you are, might actually be illusions, fabricated concepts.
And to even begin to get our heads around that, we have to start with a philosophical premise. The starting point is Immanuel Kant. The idea that what you see, what your senses tell you, isn't the full picture.
Okay, let's break that down because this is really the cornerstone for everything else we're going to talk about. Kant's big idea was that we can't ever know objective reality.
Right, he called it the noumena, the thing in itself. It's untouchable.
Untouchable because our brains are like filters.
Exactly. Our senses, our consciousness, they warp everything. So raw reality, the noumena, passes through us and comes out as the phenomena, the world of appearances.
And the classic example is time and space, right? The sources say they don't actually exist out there.
They don't. They're just the grid our brain lays over everything so that the universe makes sense to us. They are filters, nothing more.
So, if reality is just what our brains process, then the only reality that actually matters is the one we imagine. Life is just a shared act of imagination.
And that is the battleground. That's where power operates. If I can control what you imagine to be real,
Like the value of this piece of paper in my wallet.
or the line on a map that defines a country,
Yeah.
then I control you.
Which brings us to the big question for this deep dive. How does that work? How do powerful people manipulate our shared imagination? And why, according to these sources, is the history you learned in school just a false memory?
And we'll use modern examples, things like the war in Ukraine or what's happening in the Middle East to really test this framework against our understanding of the past, present, and future.
Okay, let's dive in. The first and maybe the biggest shared illusion the sources tackle is money.
Right. They say if you can't understand money, you can't understand power.
So they have this thought experiment. Let's say a customer puts $5 million into a bank, and then the bank loans that same $5 million to some company. How much money is there in the economy?
Logically, you'd say it's still 5 million. It just moved.
That's what I'd say, yeah.
But that's not how it works. The total money supply just became $10 million. The bank created new money.
Wait, hold on. How? Where did the extra $5 million come from?
It came from nowhere. When the bank makes a loan, it's not lending out that deposit. It creates a new deposit in the borrower's account with a keyboard entry. The loan is an asset for the bank, and the new deposit is a liability. Money is literally created from a promise to pay it back.
So money is just debt.
Yeah.
An entry in a ledger.
It's just a promise. And historically, this all began with old merchants. People would store their gold with them for safekeeping.
And get a paper receipt,
Yeah.
the contract.
Precisely. And then came the big idea. The merchants realized they didn't have to lend out the heavy, risky gold. They could just lend out the receipts themselves, like contracts.
They were lending out promises backed by gold they didn't necessarily have on hand.
Exactly. Creating money from thin air, it's alchemy.
But that sounds incredibly risky. I mean, you have the classic bank run where everyone comes for their gold at once.
Huge risk.
Okay.
And not just that, they lent enormous sums to kings for wars, and, well, sometimes a king just decides not to pay you back.
So how do they solve that instability?
Partnerships. The sources trace this fascinating history of banking families creating cartels, often through intermarriage to protect each other. If one bank was in trouble, the network would prop it up. If a king defaulted,
They'd fund his enemy.
you got it. And that system of networked risk management, that's what evolved into what we now call central banking.
Okay, but this creates a massive contradiction. If banks can just type money into existence, if it's infinite, why is there poverty? Why are there economic crises?
Because for the system to work, you have to believe money is scarce. That's the brainwashing the sources talk about.
If everyone had enough money, nobody would do the jobs that need doing.
Who would clean the toilets? Who would work in the factory? The whole point is to make this imaginary thing seem so valuable that you'll trade the only real thing you have, your time, your labor for it.
So the argument is that poverty, wars, even stock market crashes, they aren't accidents. They're features of the system.
They're mechanisms. Think about a crash. It's a wealth destruction event. It vaporizes trillions of dollars from ledgers. It makes everyone feel poor and scared, reinforcing that scarcity mindset and forcing them back to work.
That's a pretty dark take. To say that wars, with all the human suffering, are just engineered to destroy wealth.
The sources don't deny the suffering. but they argue it's a tool to serve the scarcity mindset. They point to something like food. I mean, we throw away tons and tons of food every single day.
So hunger isn't a problem of production, it's a problem of distribution and control. An artificial crisis.
It's all rooted in that scarcity mindset, which is the perfect way to get into our next topic.
Right. The manufactured individual. And our ideas about happiness. Today, it's all about my career, my vacation, my self-care. It's so individual.
But historically, that just wasn't a thing. The sources are clear. The concept of the individual as this separate, self-reliant unit, it didn't exist for most of history.
And happiness was a collective concept.
Completely. Being generous, helping your community,
Yeah.
that was happiness. If you suddenly got rich 500 years ago, you didn't, put it in a savings account.
No, you threw a huge feast for the entire village. You shared it.
You dispersed it immediately. It built your reputation, your social standing, and it helped the whole community survive. That was the smart move.
And you could even see this in their punishments. The worst thing that could happen to you wasn't death.
Not at all. It was banishment, exile. To be cut off from the group was a fate worse than death because outside the group, you literally weren't anyone. You had no meaning.
This connects to a bigger idea in the sources about fate and control. They lay out two worldviews. The first is the polytheistic one.
Right, the ancient world, where you're basically a puppet of these random vengeful gods. The god of anger, the god of pride. You have no control. Fate is everything.
And the second view is the modern scientific one. We're just synapses and DNA. We can control our lives with therapy, with self-reflection. We can engineer our own happiness.
Well, we're told we're in the driver's seat.
And here is where the sources just drop a bomb. They claim that the ancient polytheistic worldview is actually a more accurate description of reality than the scientific one.
Which they say is completely wrong.
Okay, why? Why would power want us to believe we're in control?
Because it makes you individually responsible for systemic problems. If you're anxious and in debt, the modern view says that's your fault. A chemical imbalance, a bad decision you made.
So the solution is individual. Go to therapy, take a pill.
Exactly. It stops you from looking outside yourself. It prevents you from banding together with other people who are also anxious and in debt and asking if maybe. The system is the problem. It kills collective action.
You're trapped blaming yourself.
And that ties into this idea of flourishing. The Greeks called it eudaimonia. If you accept that fate is largely out of your control, the polytheistic view, it's actually liberating. You stop worrying about what you can't change and you focus on living a good, full life right now.
Which is very different from our modern obsession with just chasing pleasure and avoiding sadness at all costs.
A much deeper kind of satisfaction.
So we have a system that manufactures financial scarcity and psychological scarcity. It needs an engine to implant these ideas. And that brings us to the third concept, school.
We have to forget how we think about school. For thousands of years, how did people learn?
Apprenticeship, experience. You learn by doing.
Right. The sources use this great example of a 12-year-old in a medieval hospital. After a few years, they're a better doctor than a fresh Harvard med school grad because they have real, practical experience. That system didn't need to label people smart or stupid.
But our modern system does.
Yeah.
And the sources say its main purpose isn't education. It's brainwashing.
Its primary goal is to sort and label you, to create a hierarchy for the labor force.
And the history they point to is, well, it's pretty damning. They say mandatory public schooling was invented by 3 societies.
3 societies built for war: Sparta, the Aztecs, and Prussia. And the Prussian system from the 18th century. That's the model the entire world uses today. Schools are really, really good at making obedient soldiers.
How does the brainwashing actually work, though? What's the mechanism?
It's brilliantly simple. You separate the child from the parent. A child with their parent feels secure, and a secure child can question authority. They can ask, is my teacher telling the truth?
But when you isolate the child, make them insecure.
They cling to the teacher, to the authority figure. They need that validation. They stop questioning.
And what's the main idea they're being brainwashed to believe in?
The nation state, Mother China, the American dream, all of it. History, geography, language. It's all taught in a way that implants this false memory that the nation state is this ancient, natural, all-important entity.
It replaces your real local identity, being a Parisian or a Texan, with this huge abstract identity.
An identity that says you have this profound bond with millions of strangers you'll never meet just because of a line on a map. An identity that demands your loyalty, your service, and sometimes your life.
Okay, so let's try to pull these 3 threads together. Money, The individual and the nation-state. The sources say these are all fabricated concepts.
They're all ideas that are totally beyond your direct human experience. You can experience your family, your village. You can't experience the United States. It has to be brainwashed into you.
And the sources claim all three of these ideas trace back to one single massive revolution in human thought.
Monotheism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, which the sources argue are basically the same philosophical engine. Think about it. The idea of one all-powerful, invisible God.
It turned nothing, an abstract idea, into everything. Absolute authority.
And that became the template. The single invisible God became the model for the single invisible political authority, the nation-state. The absolute moral code became the model for an absolute value system, money. And the focus on one soul's salvation became the model for the individual.
So that brings us back to the definition of power. Power is modern alchemy.
It's the ability to turn nothing into everything, to make you believe a piece of paper has value, that chasing your own happiness will fulfill you, and that an imaginary line on a map is worth dying for.
But here's the twist at the end. The sources don't present this as some grand conspiracy. They say this whole miserable system was an accident of the human imagination.
And that's the optimistic part. If our imagination created it, our imagination can create something else.
We have the capacity to control that imagination, to build a new system.
A system based not on scarcity and control, but on eudaimonia, on human flourishing, on collective well-being.
It's a truly radical way to look at the world. But the core message from these sources is clear. The first step to freedom is understanding exactly how you're being controlled. You have to question everything you take for granted and maybe start imagining a different reality.